I'm Dr. Dina Kurzweil. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Medicine and director of the Education and Technology Innovation Support Office. And with me is Lynette Hamlin out of the Graduate School of Nursing. So our planned topics and objectives for today are listed above. I'll give you a minute or two to look at them. But we really do want to help focus in on best practices for exam reviews and spend some time highlighting valid reasons for challenging questions. Those are two of our largest goals here today. So let's start with a little quote here. Take a minute and read this. This actual paper helps us see that students' questions really play an important role in meaningful learning and scientific inquiry. That student questions are a potential resource for both teaching and learning science. And despite the capacity of students' question for enhancing learning, much of answering student questions is still an untapped resource that we need to critically start thinking about integrating.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Today, I want to talk about what is a pre-exam review. So stop back and think a minute, and why I'm asking what instead of the first question, why not a pre-exam review? So why do we hold pre-exam reviews? There's a variety of reasons, and I'm going to talk about pros and cons in a minute. And then what are some elements and best practices of a pre-exam review? So should you, or we as faculty, provide a pre-exam outline in our courses? Well, the biggest pro that we all know is that it decreases our students' test anxiety. I don't think I've ever taught a class where somebody has not asked me, Dr. Hamlin, what's on the test? Can you provide us with a test blueprint? Both of those questions are really a sign of their anxiety and their desire to do well and perform well in our classes. The biggest con for me, especially in providing a pre-exam outline of my exam, is that students are only going to study the content on the outline. So I'm a nurse midwife. So what if I have many questions on gestational diabetes, but maybe there's only one or two on hypertension in pregnancy? My concern as a clinician is that students are going to study what I've put on the blueprint, not what I've covered in class that may also be important, which goes back to our first session on doing assessment questions, but they're responsible for that content when they're in clinical, and I want them to know all of that. So for me, I'm reticent to give a blueprint because I believe that what we've delivered in class is essential for them to know, and it is hard to pick and choose. So some thoughts on what we can provide for a pre-exam review. I think it's very fair to let them know how many questions. Is it a 25, 50, 100 question? It helps get them ready and psyche for that exam. And then the types of questions for them to prepare for. For example, are you doing all multiple choice? Are there going to be some matching? Do you have 5 or 6 or 10 short answers? Are you moving your questions to case-based because you want students to be able to do application of that content? Some practices that have been in the literature for conducting exam review that show as a way for students to prepare and also to help them master the content that we've provided is share pair. Have them ask each other questions in the pairing piece for the exam, whether they want to use flashcards, etc. So you have them work in pairs in the class to review some of the content. So you can allot pre-exam review time, 10, 15 minutes in your class or before or after class, to have them go through their content as pairs. Another one is asking your students to question build. Have everybody submit 1 or 2 exam questions. That doesn't mean you're going to commit to including all of them, but it does help students review the content, give some thought, and me as faculty is what their priority has been in mastering the content. And another one, which I very much like and has to go back with a flipped classroom, is to take a short practice test. Give them 2 to 3 questions to start the class.
Thank you, Dr. Hamlin. So a post-exam review. So you've given the test, you've given the exam, all the students have gotten their grades and everybody's looking at it going, what's next? So a post-exam review is time taken to look at the questions on the exam after the students have finished the test, and more importantly, grades have been submitted and turned back to them. So there are a couple of things you want to think about when doing a post-exam review. You want your students to look at, did all the totals make sense? You know, was everything graded accurately in terms of number of points? You want your students to pay attention to what they missed, and more importantly, why they got it wrong. The reason a student may have missed the question is extremely important. Was it a careless mistake? Did they not understand the question? Did they not know the answer correctly enough to answer it? They also want to look at anything that is in terms of comments that the faculty member may have made. So a post-exam review can help the students look at the actual responses. If they didn't understand a comment, they can do all of this as part of a post-exam review. One of the hidden pieces of a post-exam review that happens when students start looking at, let's say, multiple choice questions or things like that, is they learn what type of questions the instructor likes to use. So that's always an interesting piece because they'll likely see similar types on future assessments. They also need to learn the source of the questions they missed. Did they miss the information from the text or the lecture or both? And they get a better sense of correcting those mistakes. So they are not only learning what they got wrong, but learning what is the right answer. You know, it isn't part of the time in terms of doing a post-exam review is also about the student reflecting. So it isn't just running through the answers and here they are. You want to give them time to think about this. Maybe you want to make them a crib sheet that has some of these comments on it. Maybe you want them to look at it. So it's really important to spend time on post-exam reviews because spending a class period or a portion of the class period can benefit both the students and the instructor in multiple ways. Some of the post-exam benefit reviews include, you're going to be promoting metacognition, the students having that opportunity to think about their learning. You're going to be providing formative and summative feedback to the students. You're going to explore those concepts, those questions that they had problems with, and you can go into them at greater depth. You can also reduce text anxiety for future exams because they're starting to see what's expected and they're starting to realize whether or not their study techniques actually benefited them for the test. And you're also reinforcing effective test-taking strategy. In no way, shape, or form should a student ever take a test, look at the grade, and close the exam. A student should always be reviewing the exam to see what they got correct, what they got wrong, and what type of errors they made.
So a lot of questions. Should we provide a post-exam review? And we're going to go into different ways to do that. But I think, as mentioned, the biggest pro of doing it is to help our students understand the concepts that they missed. And I think that's very important for us in a practice profession, and that we can use it as a learning tool. And sometimes the learning tool is picking up with students how they're reading test questions and test anxiety. So there are some pros to it. There's also cons, and you see I've got more listed under that. I think one of the biggest is that it takes time out of our course. We already have a lot of content to do. We've got to find time to give the exams. And now here I'm saying we've got to take some time to build a post-exam review. But I find it so worth it. One of the things goes back to the honor code. Students can copy questions and answers. They can take screenshots, they can take notes. So again, we have to be very clear on the honor code with them. If we're doing it as an in-class review, so you can get eyes on everybody, make sure that they have their notes and papers down, etc. Because if there's a way, they're going to find it. And one of the other cons, simply sharing answers is unlikely to be helpful to students, as Dr. Kurzweil said. Just showing them, oh, I missed B and I missed C and I missed this and that is not going to help them understand why they missed the content. And so when we talk later about different ways of doing exam reviews, I've learned over time that one of the caveats I have to say when we do the exam reviews is I'm not going to use class time to argue or debate an answer. I'm going to do that in a private session.
So as Dr. Hamlin said, you don't want to spend time in a review debating or arguing about something. But students can challenge an exam question, especially when these 6 specific reasons come out. So if you've done an exam question and your content doesn't support that exam question, the student is going to wonder where that question came from. And that's part of the whole cycle of teaching, right? Because you need to build objectives. You need to be sure that your objectives are aligned correctly with your content and your assessment. If you're throwing in questions that aren't part of your objectives and not part of the content, the students have a valid argument. Now, you don't want to argue it during the review. You can take that aside and do those one-on-one, but you do want to consider that very carefully, especially by looking at your content and your objectives. When you've written an exam question where the options are similar or too closely related, and it's more of a trick question, you really want to consider the validity of that question. So another reason why a student can challenge an exam question. If something was poorly written, or if the answer has been coded incorrectly, again, they have a valid argument there to talk to you about that. If the current literature doesn't support the answer choice, again, this is part of our preparation for developing our courses. We want to be sure we're using current literature to support our answer choice. Now, maybe there's multiple different pieces of literature, but the students should be looking at the content provided and being given the current literature to support a correct answer. And again, if the content wasn't covered in any lecture or required reading, similar to the other one, it's not fair. You're stacking the deck. And I'm sure you guys could think of a lot of other reasons why students can challenge an exam question. But we're going to move on here to how to reply to students. So setting those ground rules. And Dr. Hamlin and I are kind of going to tag team this a little bit. So I'm going to start off with one of the things you have to make sure the students understand is that you're going to prepare them for the exam, discuss the course content, the required readings, and the material relationship to the exam. So if a student is really sitting there and arguing a point, you need to be able to really talk about how everything is linked together and how those linkages are made so that the student understands where the question came from. Dr. Hamlin?
Thank you. I think the next big one is don't be defensive with a student. Being curious is definitely an art that takes a while, but it helps both me as faculty understand why they might not have understood my question, going back to reasons that students can challenge our questions. Was, me reading it may have come across crystal clear because I know the content I've been practicing, but maybe the wording or my choices might not have been clear. And it also helps me understand the student's choice, to be able to hear why they chose that one. And I can use that as faculty as a learning moment in this, which goes to the next one, using this as a learning opportunity. So always ask those curious questions. I always have students bring answer sources when I meet with them because the literature is always changing. I hope that as an expert in the content matter, I'm up to date, but somebody might find something from the peer-reviewed literature that I may have missed. Plus, it also has them go back into their textbooks. I'm I'm not so big on having them bring their PowerPoint slides from class as their answers unless it's very contradictory. But again, it helps them review and look at the question and their answers before they come to me. How do we do this? I think in opening up an exam review, part of that is setting the ground rules. I always say this is the opportunity to help you understand what you missed, to know that you have gained the content so that you can be excellent, competent providers, and that I'm not going to use this time to be arguing right or wrong questions. If you think that I've missed the boat on this question, come see me after the review or after class, and let's set up a time to go over it.
You know, the class time is to go over the exam and to help the students understand how those connections are made. It's that private one-on-one time where you're asking your student to articulate their understanding, their knowledge base, and where they got that knowledge base from. They'll do an internet search to support their answers, even if it isn't current. And that's the key there, is that, you know, if they're looking for things just to look for things and it isn't the current idea, well, and it isn't part of your reading and part of what the work they were given, that's fine. They can find, you can basically find whatever you want to find on the internet. The point is, was this taught this way in this course? And that's kind of the key piece there. You know, they'll say that are arguing for the points, and that's great. We love that they're not arguing for the points, they're arguing for the knowledge. But if the knowledge is incorrect, if the knowledge is old knowledge, and if the knowledge wasn't taught to them, they don't really have that ground to stand on. And they have to, in the pre-exam review, understand where the content for the exam is coming from. They can find something else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that supports the argument. So supporting metacognition and test reviewing is critical for student success. Designing post-exams as an interactive learning strategy allows us to identify a few concepts that most or all of the students struggled with during the exam. During the post-exam review, spend some time on the concepts where you, in your review of all the students, saw some alignment, or other words, misalignment in their answers. Watch your students apply what they have learned. Look at why they failed and talk to them about what they're going to do to improve or how to prevent failure in the future. Developing questions might prompt students to look at how many hours they actually studied, what strategies they used to master the material, and where and under what conditions studying occurred. That's really important today, especially in our virtual kind of work from home world, that if they're not giving themselves that time, that place, and the strategies to actually start studying, the likelihood of them falling short of their educational goals is high. And we need to remind them over and over and over again about where they're studying, how they're studying, okay, what time they're studying. Because if they're trying to do it when 3 kids are behind them ready for dinner, they're not going to learn. Studying won't be effective. And so think about how you're supporting the students' metacognition for their own success. Have those questions ready, even as just prompts where they reflect on it. So think about, where did you study? You know, you may want to even ask them that in an exam. When did you study? How long did you study? Any of these questions are fine, little reflective questions to help them start thinking about their own studying strategies.